So just before they start, we collected a lot of questions. Some of them probably are not for Ivo and Christian; they are more general. So I hope we will have enough time, maybe another 15-20 minutes after this meeting, where I can go through some more general questions, and we can then switch to Russian. But right now, that will work the following way. We expect about 20 minutes presentation, first from Ivo and then from Christian. And you're also welcome to send the questions to... sorry. And of course, you're also welcome to send the questions to our administrative, who is hiding under Noya Adamov picture, Ekaterina. She is today responsible for management of this meeting. And please send all questions to her directly, and she will already forward it to me. You are allowed to rename yourself, but your camera and your mic will be always off. Okay. So with that, I would like to give a word to Ivo Ganchev, who is our first speaker today. He is a specialist in international politics and founder of the Center for Regional Integration in London, previously lecturing in Queen Mary University of London, and currently he is connecting to us from Beijing, which is really nice of you, because I believe it's like around 10 or 11 p.m. for you right now. Very, very late. So he will talk about career possibilities for academic researchers in the industry. Ivo, please, we welcome you. You're on stage.
Please sure. Start. Thanks a lot, Alex. Let me just share my slides and I'll get started. Okay. Okay, so let me just double check. Can everybody see my slides and hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Okay, very good. So first of all, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak to you. The topic that I've kind of set for my little 20-minute talk is non-traditional career change paths for academics, bridging scholarship and industry. And just a couple of sentences or so of background about me so that you can understand why am I talking about this topic. I did work full-time in academia at Queen Mary, and then I started getting other opportunities along the way to start a company, to move to China, to start to do consultancy and so on. And eventually, I kind of started to willingly transition out of academia while still teaching at various universities. So I kept teaching at different universities here. Right now, I teach at Beijing Foreign Studies University. I teach executive programs there. And at the same time, I kept publishing. So I sort of stayed in the middle in between academia and industry. And I ended up working as a partner at a Chinese consultancy company in branding. So that's sort of where my background lies and like where my standpoint sort of comes from. So in the first few slides, I've kind of recycled the first few slides from another talk that had to do with tips for academics that are trying to find jobs in other countries. So I'll very briefly speak about the idea of sort of transitioning from an academic career in one country to another one in the West. And then I'll move on to the main part of the talk, which is more about sort of transitioning into the reasons why we actually work in academia and paths to transition into industry and perhaps get the same type of satisfaction or this reach the same type of achievements in industry as well. So first of all, the way that I think of universities by and large is I look at them just like any other organization, just like any other business. They hire us because we fulfill a particular need for them, because we're a good fit for the position, because we can do something for them, just for the same reason that a company hires somebody. and they pay us salaries because we create value. Whether you work at a private university and the university collects tuition fees, whether you work at a state sponsored university and you have a certain number of students and you get sponsored to keep running these programs and recruit students, at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're providing value, and this is why you're getting paid. So when we try to apply to universities, we try to often show that we have all the required qualification, we have the teaching ability. If we're applying to Western universities, we try to get all of our teaching feedback forms. We want to show our research track record, and that we want to show that we can secure funding as well. I'm sure that Christian will probably mention this later, but as far as my experience goes, the sort of showing that you can maybe get research grants or generate other ways of providing funding to the university is something that that's greatly valued, especially if you're trying to go up the ladder in an academic career, and of course to show that you're good colleagues as well. And the idea when you were applying to academic jobs, at least in the way that I've done it myself in the past, has always been sort of similar to the way I pitch myself in business. So I try to see what they're looking for, and I try to look at all the keywords in the job ad, and I try to explain to them that I have certain experiences and skills that match what exactly they're looking for. But of course, all of this can prove a lot more difficult if you're looking for an academic job in a different country, which I believe is the case for most of our attendees today. And there's a lot of statistics about academics that, or sort of PhD holders that graduate with PhDs, and most of them, for some reason that I think has to do a lot with sort of romanticizing academia. A lot of them just have this idea that they want to stay in academia, and this is sort of the best career path after their PhD. But not that many of them stay in academia, and some of them don't necessarily stay there because perhaps they can't get the job that they want exactly. But others might not stay in academia because of other reasons, because they're looking for higher pay in industry, because they're looking for creating a more tangible impact on the world, because perhaps they'd like to work in the field that they're researching. So rather than writing about it, they want to do it themselves. So there's a lot of reasons which could actually be also voluntary for leaving academia. And the other thing is that the number of PhDs we award is much greater than the number of positions that are available. So it's impossible for everybody to end up in academia, but there's also sort of reasons why you could willingly choose not to pursue this path. If you're trying to get a global academic job, this is something that, again, as I mentioned, I look at it as a job market which matches supply and demand. And I try to think of it as you trying to pitch yourself as a brand. So that if you're applying, let's say, from Russia or from China or from anywhere else, the university doesn't necessarily know exactly what your previous department was like. Maybe they've never heard of it, or maybe they've heard of it, but they don't know exactly how it works. They don't necessarily know what exactly the standards for teaching are there. If they look at your publications, which might be mostly in Russian, they might not necessarily be aware of what's the equivalent value of these publications, and they frankly might not be as interested in this because when you transfer to an English-speaking environment, well, who's going to be reading your publications in Russian? I assume your colleagues and students won't really be doing this. So there's a part of it that has to do with a big difficulty of this transition, and the difficult task for you is trying to sell your skills and to package them in a way that that fits the requirements of a Western university. So normally, when you're trying to apply for jobs like these, my at least personal piece of advice would be trying to fit what the departments are looking for, trying to present yourself as someone with the skill set or expertise. Let's say you work in political science, but you have a particular strength in Russian politics or post-Soviet countries. You can emphasize this. You can try to make yourself sort of play on your strengths the same way that you would do if you're trying to sell a product. You can target your application job pack to your target universities. And later, as we're going to see, it's the same for companies as well. I've seen a lot of cases of personal friends of mine who try to send the same application or the same project or the same reference letters from their colleagues or former supervisors to a lot of universities. And in my experience, that doesn't necessarily end very well, because what the universities are looking for could be slightly different. So you want to try, as I mentioned before, and get out these keywords or these key things that they're looking for, and try to see how your story, your voice, your experience, and so on matches. Often you could also try and maybe replace some of these words with synonyms, but say the same thing. And there's sort of a balance between matching the job ad and being unique and playing on your strengths here as well. Often the first hurdle is making the HR shortlist, and it's the same both in academia and in industry. And if you don't make the HR shortlist to begin with, then the committee, the recruiting committee, will never actually see your application, because you're going to get cut off at the first stage. But of course, a lot of you, I assume, might have experienced difficulties with these things. And even if you have done everything right, it's not necessarily the case that you will find an academic position when you need it and where you need it, because there's just a limited amount of them. So my perspective when I started to transition out of academia was very much focused on, why am I looking for an academic position? When I started to teach, I was kind of fascinated with this idea of, becoming a tenured professor one day and going up the ladder. And then I started sort of teaching year over year and repeating a lot of the same things in my modules and grading essays, which started to look the same over time. So I started really questioning, what do I get out of this? And there's a lot of things that could attract you to academia. Maybe you like the job. Maybe there's a certain job security that comes with this. Maybe you need a salary, just any salary you need to pay for your life. You need or you like to have a title, or you want to have legitimacy in your field. Maybe you like the institutional affiliation, or you like to own your ideas. You don't want to write reports for McKinsey. You want to write reports with your name written under them, and that's okay. And you might also like the relative freedom of work as well. At least that's as far as I got with my list of things that mainly sort of motivated me to pursue this type of job. And then I started thinking, well, is there an alternative path to achieve these things? Is there a path which could maybe allow me to achieve them on my own terms, allow me to achieve them in a way that doesn't make me dependent on an institution, that allows me to create more real impact, that allows me to have, frankly, a more exciting life, be able to move more, be able to earn more, if you'd like, and so on. And there's actually a lot of ways that you could do this. When you talk about job security, well, one opportunity is you could look for another employer, like an international institution or a large company that also offers you relative job security. You could also pursue another path of having multiple institutional affiliations, which is one of the things that I've been doing in Beijing. So at the moment, there are 3 universities that I'm on very good terms with. And if I'm not teaching at one of them, I could be teaching at the other. As long as I'm willing to be relatively flexible, maybe on time or on the exact type of content of the module, you could actually mix and match the sort of the sources of income that you have. You could also consider owning a business. And when I say a business here, you could own a company, and this company could do maybe in part business that has to do with some consultancy or some private projects. And in part, you could offer services to universities. You could effectively be a course provider for them, which is one of the things that I've been doing here as well. And in this way, well, first of all, you do end up making a much larger profit, because now you're not just a salaried employee. Now you're a provider of a service that is getting paid at a certain rate. Second, you also have a lot of maybe control of certain aspects. So, for instance, as a course provider here, I get to sort of design the courses, and I get to be somebody that the university kind of depends on in the future when they have similar demands. If you think about the salary, this is something that kind of struck me quite a few years ago. The person that I know who has taken the largest grant ever that I've personally sort of seen and with my own eyes is a professor at Newcastle who's a friend of mine, a colleague of mine. Is called Guy Austin, and he ended up with a group of scholars getting about 1.2, I believe, million British pounds, and there it was a project where a few scholars applied all together. It was about 5 of them. So if you look at the amount of money that you can receive in grants, and I'm talking about a large grant, a full tenured professor, this type of grant was something that took them years to get, something that drips in slowly over time, something that doesn't fully reach them because the university withholds a part of the money and so on. And if you look at industry, if you work in industries such as consultancy, a 6-figure salary is sort of a standard very often if you work at the international level. So in a way, something that a tenured professor might only get after they turn 50 or 60 at a very senior level is something that is maybe the money that you make in consultancy in a couple of years when you're frankly in your late 20s, early 30s. So the funding is something that you could secure for yourself, and if you wish to use it for research or for some project, you're still free to do so. You could also do this at a much younger age and without any dependence on grants applications, committees, and so on. Remember that a lot of people don't ever take these large grants. There's a lot of people that never see a large grant like this in their life. And if you work in industry, you could get money like this every year, basically, which might sound very materialistic, but at the end of the day, it's a consideration. It's something that you could use to create research centers, to fund research projects, to hire people that also work on your research projects. And you could just do this completely independently. When you think about a title or legitimacy, you could literally create entire organizations and projects that you're the head of. In a way, when you figure out the funding problem, you're not dependent anymore on the university supporting your research. You can support it yourself if you'd like. You can keep an institutional affiliation to an institution. There are plenty of reputable NGOs, research centers that would happily work with you as a fellow. You could be an adjunct professor. When you get more experienced, you can become a professor of practice as well, which is one of the things that, for instance, I aspire to as well. If you're a very successful person in industry, in diplomacy, in international institutions, I'm quite sure that most universities would be very happy to have you as a professor of practice without having gone through the sort of difficulty of going through 20, 30 years in academia, step by step up the ladder. You can still keep your ownership of ideas if you publish, for instance, in journals, even if you work in industry. No one stops you from publishing. The only problem is you have to make your own time for this, which is a bit of a shortcoming. You can keep a relative freedom of work. So if you're, instead of simply find another job, if you try to set up a small company that provides services to multiple clients, you can effectively have full control over your job as well. So there's a lot of different ways that you can achieve that in ways that, at least like to me, seem well, I would say more appealing than the traditional academic path. And this also doesn't close the academic path. You can still keep your publications, your research impact, your media interviews. You can do all of this with the same sort of power, if you wish, or impact. When I think about this, I often take the career goals as well as another starting point. If you set up a career goal that simply says, I want to get tenure, or I want to become a full professor, this could cause you a lot of problems related to potential disappointment. And the reasons are not necessarily related to your ability per se. It's just first that statistically, not all academics become full professors. So it's possible that this might never happen. And also because I'm not sure that getting the title itself is a notable achievement more broadly in society. So you might be respected in your circle, but if you're looking at doing something that actually makes a difference, if you go and you create a certain brilliant idea or a certain brilliant book, then you would later get the title of professor of practice simply as a reward for this brilliant thing that you created anyway. So the way that I think about it is setting career goals is something that you should think about carefully and make sure that you don't set them up in a way that's potentially setting up for failure, that's potentially not leading to an achievement, but simply to some sort of a title or a certain step on the ladder, and then there's nothing more behind it. You could set a lot of alternative goals. You can say, hey, I'd like to publish 5 books or 10 books, or I'd like to have a book with Harvard University Press or a big university press, or I want to publish in a certain journal with a certain level of public prominence, make a real impact on the world. You can say, I want to earn financial freedom, create a fundamentally innovative product or idea. Well, what's the benefit of setting up your goals like this? Well, first of all, you have control over this. The idea of becoming a professor is not something that you necessarily have full control of, because you're not the person who decides whether you become a professor. It's other people on committees. Whereas if you set the goal of, creating and publishing some brilliant book that you work on for years, nobody can stop you from doing this. If you work hard enough, eventually you will get this book contract. Eventually you're going to put this book out. Eventually you're free to market it and popularize it as much as you'd like. So these are things that have also to do with the control that you have over your career and over achieving your goals. You might also have other goals like achieving a certain work-life balance, having the ability to change countries perhaps more often. Jobs in industry are clearly much more common than jobs in academia. So there's also this aspect to it as well. So when you think about jobs in academia, I work in the social sciences. Clearly, I'm a political scientist. So there's plenty of options for PhD holders in social sciences. I haven't spoken about STEM here. First, not an expert. And second, I think that there's a lot of options in things like pharmaceutical industries and so on that a lot of other people are going to be much more familiar with. There's a lot of things you can do with PhDs in social sciences. You can go into corporate consultancy. I think it's no secret that the big consulting companies are probably the greatest wealth creating machines ever made by mankind. So if this is something that you aspire to, a large salary at a young age, this is clearly a path that you can take. Corporate management, a lot of people in social sciences have excellent management skills. You could work at an NGO or research center. There's plenty of these around. The work there also involves a lot of publications. It's also more related to the sort of making a real impact per se. You can serve as a fellow at an institute. You can consider getting into public service in diplomacy or government roles. I have a lot of friends at embassies in Beijing that came through academia, or at least at some point in their career were in academia. You can consider international institutions, for instance, the AIB here. Again, it's in Beijing. That's because this is where I'm at the moment, but the same is valid for other international institutions. This is not limited to the AIB. There are people who have held academic positions, maybe not particularly high academic positions. They've been an assistant professor at a university. I'm not talking at a top university, and later they ended up becoming a senior expert in economics, for instance, at institutions such as development banks, and they're more than happy to welcome people with a strong academic background. They again also publish papers, publish books, and so on. There's this whole aspect to it. They work with university students. They provide a lot of internship programs for a few months every year for the university students. There's a lot of aspects that are quite similar. Or you could also consider starting or developing a business. And again, when I say a business, I don't mean that you sit every day in an office and run a company. You can have a company that simply provides services, and you can be the service provider here. You could also teach universities through your company, as long as they're fine with it. This is another issue that that's worth sort of clarifying with them. In particular, when you talk about finding a job in industry, obviously the application process is different than that of academia. I strongly recommend seeking advice from people in the field that you're aiming to work in. Also, it's something that might sound a little strange to some of you at first, but if you do want to work in industries such as consultancy and you're looking for advice or help, there are many people who make a living out of being coaches to aspiring consultants. And it's not particularly expensive. You can simply Google this and you can find hundreds of these people who can help you with everything from tailoring your CV to trying to work out how to answer all the questions about case studies during the interviews and so on. There are also plenty of books on this. I assume since everybody's an academic here, you could simply go on Amazon and you could type, well, how to get a job in something, and you can get a lot of excellent tips there. I'm not saying it's going to be the full picture, but it's a very, very good starting point. There are plenty of videos on YouTube for people that work in all kinds of industries, and also from academics who have transitioned. or who are transitioning, especially sort of the younger generation. I didn't sort of catch this wave, but maybe people that are a few years younger than me, a lot of them tend to sort of document their career journey, and they get loads of followers because people want to know, people that want to change careers, or people that are aspire to be in an industry. So there's lots of these resources that you have pretty much available, you know, from your laptop. Now, of course, you have to think about your skills and how you can sell them to a potential employer. But remember that you're already extremely educated and very skilled in certain areas, such as your analytical skills or a certain skills related to the sector that your PhD is in or that you're an expert in. So you already actually probably have the skills to be a very successful manager, consultant, or whatever else you might choose to be in industry. You can talk to again, people that work in these areas, and make sure to research how to cut down your long and extensive CV down to 2 pages that are concise and are really the highlights, the best of what you've done. Speaking or presenting yourself rather, in sort of corporate situations, normally has to do a lot with speaking concisely, up to the point. So communication is very often sort of top down, or what I'm referring to here is giving the main idea and then breaking down maybe the little points in a very structured way, in a very sort of short and direct way. Not exactly the same way that I'm doing it now, because right now this is more of a sort of a free form talk, but in a much more sort of structured and focused way. Another thing that you could consider specifically for your case is you could possibly consider registering a company in another country. And I'll tell you why I'm bringing this up. I think that a lot of you potentially have considerations related to moving out of Russia at the moment. So if you want to move out of Russia, for some of you, you might be happy to wait for 1 or 2 or 3 years until you find a great job or a great opportunity. That's fine. For some of you, this might be more urgent. You might simply want to move faster, or you might have some other reason, personal or other reason, that pushes you to move out. And you might run into issues related to visas, for instance. If you register a company in another country, again, there's different regulations and so on, but this is something that, where a lot of it can be done for a few $100s or so by consultants that you can find online. And once you register a company in a country, then you're in many cases able to also get a visa to stay in this country. And this can serve as your initial way out if you're really sort of have to make this jump quickly. And once you do this, again, you could maybe start by providing some services to any university or any institution that you can find immediately, so you can sort of get your feet into get your feet in into this new area or city or country. And you could also later establish institutional affiliations that serve as a way of branding or launching another project. If you're actually keen on developing something that's marketable in some way related to your specific skills or your specific industry, being affiliated with an industry, even if you're an adjunct professor or even if you're just maybe an external lecturer there, that helps. This is something that can help you raise funding. It can help you with a lot of other aspects as well, and make you more sort of trustworthy in any potential marketplace. It's a good idea to think about your skills, which of your skills are marketable, which of your skills are something that is actually of value to potential clients, and how can you adapt your current skills to the market. Maybe the skill of writing a journal paper is not exactly adaptable, but the skill of performing research that can answer questions which companies are interested in, this is something that could potentially be very marketable. So you can try and repackage your skills. Also consider whether you're actually using this type of company to work sort of as an independent contractor and as a reason to sort out your visa and so on, or whether you're interested in working with other people, putting together a team, compiling a team of perhaps freelancers, perhaps local people where the labor costs be quite cheap and so on. So this could be a potential option that can get you out of Russia quickly, and that could later also develop into something more substantial. A lot of my friends who are trying to move out of certain countries whether Russia or somewhere else, start normally to look for jobs exclusively in the West. This is something that has both good and bad sides. Of course, I understand your aspirations to move to some of the Western countries, especially in academia. But if you're trying to move into a job in industry in Western countries, consider whether the company can offer you visa sponsorship. For instance, in the UK, that's something that's also an issue for a lot of the students that graduate. They might find a job, but not at a place which can sponsor their visa. So this is another consideration. Or you can just look for jobs elsewhere. There's lots of places like the place where I am right now in China, where there's not such an issue related to sponsoring visas. Any company can hire any foreign person if they like it, as long as they meet certain requirements to be classified as talent. Well, that's what they call it, sort of A-level talent, B-level talent, so on. You can get a work visa and you can settle in. And there's lots of countries where it's also even much easier. If you look at places like the Middle East that are actively recruiting more international faculty at universities, or Middle Eastern companies that operate globally. If you look at the developing region of Southeast Asia, where there's a lot of, again, both universities and business opportunities coming up, I think there's a lot more than just the West on the map, basically. And then another question that you might be thinking about is, can I return to academia later? Again, I haven't fully done the transition back and forth a few times, but I'm clearly in both at the moment. And I think that you can maintain your connection to academia in certain ways. You can continue to publish while working in industry. You can continue to do conference presentations. Of course, not as often perhaps, but you can choose one or two big conferences in your industry and just go there once or twice per year. Do a few virtual conferences as well on the side, and you can keep this sort of track record going. You can engage with NGOs, research centers, universities, even if it's on a part-time basis or just to do some guest lectures. You can do it adjunct professorship, part-time teaching throughout. There's plenty of places, again, that welcome external lecturers or somebody to lead a specific module who's an expert in a field and works in industry, especially if their industry job is related to the field that they're teaching in. So there's plenty of things that you can do so that you can keep the backup option of returning to academia at some later stage. This requires effort. So word of warning, for example, the fact that I'm working on books and articles at the moment and my main source of income is not related to this just means that I have to make my own time for it. But if you're willing to do that, then you don't have any problem with this at all. Or if you're willing to set up an organization the way that I have, and to find a way to perhaps fund it or invest in it, and to sort of bring other people under the umbrella of a research project, that also works independently quite well as well. And before I wrap up, I wanted to mention a couple of words related to perhaps the future of universities or education or higher education in what a lot of people now call the AI age. There's a lot of things that are happening, like, for example, teaching assistants that are based on AI chatbots at the moment. And it's worth considering whether sort of the type of teaching that we do at university is really here to stay. It's also worth considering whether the slow process of publication in journals that sometimes takes a couple of years to get an article out is something that is really adequate to the global sort of social, political, economic situation in 2023 and beyond. I've long maintained that universities are overdue for sort of a large reform. I think in a few years we're going to start seeing professors of subjects which have to do with, for instance, some of the sort of closed area of knowledge, for instance, bodies of theory, where you're simply going to see an AI-based solution, whether it's a robot, hologram, virtual lecturer, or something else, which is immensely knowledgeable about these fields, because this is a closed body of knowledge, just the way that the chess bots surpass Garry Kasparov in a closed game. I believe that it's not particularly difficult to imagine how a closed system of knowledge would be overtaken by an AI-based solution. The idea that we get all these people physically in a lecture hall and they sit there and we talk to them and they just sit and listen. This is something that's extremely outdated. That's one of the reasons why in the UK, for instance, a lot of universities require tutors to go through professional sort of certification, that they have a tutoring qualification or teaching qualification, because there's a lot of more dynamic things, engaging sort of virtual resources, modern things like podcasts, interactive seminars, simulations, and so on, that gets incorporated into teaching, because the model is just outdated. And I think that the more time goes on, the more this is going to start to change the nature of academia, and also potentially limit the opportunities for doing this sort of old-fashioned style of, you know, lecturing and publication in journals, because it's just going to lose its relevance to the way that society operates. Just a couple of words and I'll wrap up here. If you're looking for further resources on anything, like for instance, let's say getting contract with a publisher, or marketing your research, or looking at academics that talk about being a first-generation academic, or why didn't I get a certain academic job, or how can I transition to industry. There's plenty of as I mentioned, books on Amazon, video channels on YouTube, where people talk about it, people that have experienced it and seen it. Everybody comes from a different angle, a different perspective. So you can literally get to hear dozens of people who have done different things that might be relevant to you. So I think that I've possibly gone over time. So thanks for listening to the whole sort of mini talk. Feel free to reach out if I can help with anything. Do let me know. That's my email address is here. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the next part of the event, to Christian's talk.
Thanks a lot, Ivo. That was really great. Very nice. We are slightly going over time, so maybe what I suggest right now, that we move to the talk by Christian, and then we try to address questions that we collected over time, and then one of you, whoever, can decide which one they prefer to answer. So our next speaker is Kристиан Каунерт. Christian, I believe you should have the rights to switch on your camera and your phone.
Yeah, I'm there. All good.
I can see you. Yes. Sorry. So Christian is a professor of international security at Dublin City University, and formerly professor at the Institute of European Studies and director of European Institute for Security and Justice. And today he will talk about possibilities of finding some kind of financial support for researcher and do work at universities through attracting third-party financial funding. Thank you, Christian, and we're happy to have you here, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Ivo, also for the previous presentation. Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure, great honor to be here with you, and I hope that I will have something useful to say. I think Ivo's presentation was great in terms of setting out a picture for non-academic jobs, but also perhaps a little bit for academic jobs. I aim to build on that. I'm not going to show you a PowerPoint, I'll just talk, but feel free to ask me any questions afterwards in terms of what you might have found most interesting. Now, let me just start with the academic picture more generally, because in the academia, there's obviously a number of things that are important. Obviously, you all know that teaching is very important, and teaching your subjects are very, very important. But of course, the research side is something that sets universities apart, and because it sets universities apart, it is something that is essential and is really very, very important for your academic career and so on. And as part of that academic career, as it were, you really have three aspects that are particularly important. The first one you probably already know: you need to publish or perish. So all of that is obviously very clear, and you're perfectly aware of that. You're probably publishing articles, you're publishing books, you're probably have no problem understanding the importance of that. But there's two other aspects that are also very important in the academic career, and in particular, the second aspect I'll be focusing very significantly on. The second aspect here is projects. Projects, in particular research funding, is one of those aspects of academia, particularly in the UK and in Ireland, that have become really quite crucial in terms of developing an academic career. I have, in fact, a dual affiliation. As Alex pointed out, I'm professor at Dublin City University. I'm also professor of policing security at University of South Wales in the UK, so I have a dual affiliation. And I can tell you in both of the contexts, the funding aspect is very, very important. Obviously, PhDs and PhD students are also very, very important. And obviously excelling in administration, management, excelling in research, excelling in teaching, and excelling in engagement nowadays, you also need to have some form of public engagement, impact, and so on. So all of that is very important. But let's just look at the aspect of the research, because in the United Kingdom, for instance, you have the UK Research Excellence Framework. Here in this particular framework, excellence is assessed in terms of quantitative measures like research activity, bibliometric indicators, external research income, and also postgraduate student engagement. There's also an element of peer review where you're submitting your items to a central assessment peer review system by your colleagues that are then assessing the quality of your particular items, but also assessing the quality of the environment in which you're working, the quality of your PhD students, and everything else. This is obviously very important in terms of assessing quality and quantity of research outputs. This research excellence framework in the UK is also an opportunity for you, because this focus on excellence is really where you can make a difference. The UK academic context is quite penetrable, if you like, from the outside. It's one of those contexts. You're probably aware that in different academic contexts, obviously networks are always very important. So that's certainly something that you need to work on for sure. But in the UK context, the research side, in particular the research publications, and in particular the research funding sides, and this focus on excellence is really one of the keys in which you can make it in universities, and which you are able to influence personally. That is something that you yourself can massively influence. It's crucial for universities. Research funding is one of the most important aspects of university contexts, and therefore is something that you can really very, very heavily influence. The assessment here in terms of research excellence in the UK is on outputs, most significantly on outputs, so research articles, books, and so on. The impact: do you influence the policy world? Does your research have an impact on the policy world? Do they change their behavior as a result of your research? That's also very important. The research environment, the kind of events that you have in your university, the PhD students, everything else, and all of that is assessed on a 5-point scale or 4-point scale nowadays, in terms of assessing 4-star, 3-star, 2-star, 1-star, and unclassified research items, where then staff are selected for assessment and they're sent to a unit of assessment. So all of that gives you then with an opportunity, how do you then make a difference? How do you make a difference in a particular system that values research outputs, that values research funding? So I'll have a couple of suggestions for you in terms of how you can really bring out your research excellence and how you can, in a sense, influence being selected. Now, as part of the research funding, there's a number of different streams that I want to introduce to you. So there's obviously the pan-European stream. There's the Horizon Europe stream, the European Union funding for research. The United Kingdom is participating again in that Horizon Europe from the 1st of January onwards. So any kind of European funding can be applied for in the Republic of Ireland, can be applied for in the United Kingdom. And specifically, there's a number of particular schemes that I would highlight to you. The one that obviously stands out the most is the European Research Council. And here you have a number of different schemes. The European Research Council, I would outline to you, if you're a talented early career scientist, you've already produced some excellent supervised work, you're ready to work independently, you show potential to be a research leader, then I would say the starting grant is for you. In order to apply for a starting grant, and if you're interested, you're always welcome to contact me by email, either at DCU or at University of South Wales. I can guide you on that. For the starting grant, so that's the first one. If you're in a kind of postdoctoral phase, you've just finished your PhD, maybe 2 years ago you finished your PhD, because researchers of any nationality, so that includes, of course, Russia, are allowed to apply for that within 2 to 7 years since their completion of their PhD. So between 2 and 7 years after you finished your PhD, you can apply for the starting grant. Now, if you have more than 7 years after your PhD, you can still apply for grants, but it's not the starting grant anymore, then it's the consolidator grant. You can also, if you had parental leave, get some extension on it. The PhD defense date is the important aspect here. And you can make applications in any field of research. So the ERC grants, they operate on a bottom-up basis without any predetermined priorities. Whatever the research topic is that you want to do, you can do it. You must be obviously in a public or in a private research organization that is validated by the host country. So here in particular in the United Kingdom or the Republic of Ireland, you should already work there, or you have to have the commitment. So in your case, you probably don't work there already, but if you get the commitment of the organization that they would employ you if you get the grant, and usually organizations will employ you if you get a European Research Council grant, there isn't really any doubt about that. You get the commitment that they will employ you, and then you can submit an application on behalf of that host institution. There's a number of different conditions in terms of how you need to be able to independently read the research, manage the funding. You can be in any EU member state to hold that particular grant, or associated country like the United Kingdom from the 1st of January onwards. You do not need to be employed at the time of the application. You just need to have a commitment by the organization to employ you in case that you are successful. You then build a team around you as an individual researcher. You have PhD students, you have research assistants, and so on, and you can apply for up to 5 years. So the European Research Council is for 1.5 million up to 5 years. So you can use that for your own position, you can use that for your PhD students, for your research assistants, and you can cover up to 100% of all the eligible costs. So it doesn't even cost the university anything, because 100% of all the eligible direct costs, plus, and that's why it's interesting for the university, a contribution of 25% towards indirect costs. So the university, on top of paying you and on top of paying all your team, they're also getting 25% of the grant towards their own indirect costs. So it is actually something profitable for the university as well. So that's why it's almost a shoe-in if you do that. You first submit a proposal, a shorter version, a longer version. In case your shorter version is evaluated positively, then the evaluators look at the longer version of the proposal. Then if they still evaluate it positively, they invite you to an interview, and then they decide ultimately whether the grant is awarded to you or not. Now, if you are a little bit more senior, so that is more than 7 years after your PhD, then you can still apply for the European Research Council, but you wouldn't apply for the starting grant, you would apply for the consolidator grant. The consolidator grant has obviously slightly higher expectations in terms of publications that you've done already, the track record that you have of independence and everything else. But more or less, it's got the same eligibility condition. It's got the same kind of general conditions that you need to have in order to lead a grant. But you can ask for slightly more money as well. So you can ask here for up to 2 million euros, again, for a period of 5 years. So you can really create a long-term position for yourself there in case you're successful. Now, if you have more than 12 years experience after your PhD, you would then go to the advanced grant. The advanced grant is really for maybe people who are already on track to be a full professor, maybe already are a full professor, who've been really in research for a long time and have a very significant research track records, in particular over the last 10 years, because they're evaluating mainly the last 10 years of your research track record. Then you're eligible to apply for this particular grant, where you're then able to go up to 2.5 million for a period of 5 years. So again, You can build your teams, you can have your PhD student, research assistant, etc., and the university, on top of getting all of the direct costs, will get 25% towards indirect costs as well. So it's an interesting proposition, both for you, because you'll have your own team, and for the university. So this is something that I can highly encourage. Now, if you are at the earlier stages of your career, so let's say you are more in a postdoctoral phase, you're not much more than maybe 2 years after your PhD, the European Union has another type of funding as well, and the postdoctoral fellowships here, the Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowships that I would recommend here. There's 2 particular types of postdoctoral fellowships. The first one is called a European postdoctoral fellowships. Those ones are open to researchers that move within Europe or that are coming to Europe, so from Russia, for instance, from another part of the world, to pursue their career. You can apply for either 1 or 2 years. My recommendation is always go for 2 years, because if you apply just for 1 year, you're still going to write the same long application, so you may as well have 2 years. So that's for the European postdoctoral fellowship, or you do a global postdoctoral fellowship where you are basically funding somebody to go outside Europe and then come back for 1 year into Europe. So both are possible. For both of them, you can build in a shorter secondment as well, where you're going to yet another university somewhere else in the world for up to 6 months. These are usually for people that should have their degree, obviously their PhD degree already when they start applying. They should have successfully defended their doctoral thesis, but you don't necessarily have to have the certificate in your hands. You're still considered eligible. You need to have a maximum of 8 years of experience in research from the date of the award of the PhD degree. So if you have more than 8 years after the PhD, unfortunately, you're no longer eligible. And this is the most important thing here, you need to be mobile. So you need to actually change countries. So you cannot, in a sense, apply for Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowship in the country where you're already resident. So in case that you're already living in a European country, then you cannot apply for that in that country that you're already living. You have to go to another European country in order to apply for that. You get a good salary, they're quite generous, good mobility allowance, they pay for your families as well. So it's a very, very attractive proposition as well. Now, in the United Kingdom, I want to mention one in particular. So if you're interested in that particular postdoctoral fellowship, you're very welcome to also contact me here. It's the British Academy International Fellowship, the British Academy International Fellowship. The one for 2024 is not advertised yet, but usually they come out around January, February, March time. Last year, or this year, in fact, it was advertised. It opened on the 31st of January with a deadline until 28th of March. It's probably something similar that you can do. Again, this year it was run as a 3-year fellowship, so you could stay up to 3 years as a postdoctoral researcher. You have to come into the UK. So the aim here is to attract very talented international early career researchers to conduct their research in the UK, to support those career researchers to produce quality research, to help them to transition into more important research position. The eligibility conditions here are you need to be in the final stages of your PhD or have already passed your PhD. You should not have more than 7 years postdoctoral experience. So no more than 7 years since your PhD was awarded. You need to be outside of the UK in order to be coming into the UK, and you cannot hold UK citizenship to be applying for that. But then when you have a university and a sponsor, a mentor, like myself, for instance, identified, that person can then sponsor you to apply for that. And you can then apply for that where you're basically, in addition to getting your own salary for 3 years, you're also getting research expenses paid up to 12,000, and you're getting relocation costs up to £8,000 as well. So this is quite an attractive proposition. Something similar to that in the Republic of Ireland is the Government of Ireland Postdoctoral Fellowship Program. The Postdoctoral Fellowship Program is a 2-year program. Well, you can do 1 year or you can do 2 years, but again, I would recommend that you do 2 years. When you have a mentor from an Irish university like myself, I could be your mentor, you can then apply for these prestigious awards with a project a little bit similar to the Newton Fellowship or the the British Academy ones, similar also to the ERC or the Marie Curie. 2 years eligibility criteria. Again, you need to have a PhD. You need to do it in an Irish university, and you don't have too many years post PhD award. So I'll end on that note because I don't want to keep going for too long and then you don't get a chance to ask me any questions. So just to give you a little flavor of what is out there, and I'm very much looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. That was amazing, and I hope it was very helpful for many of our participants today. Yeah, we already have some questions in the chat, and there were actually also one extra we got in a similar topic during the registration. So I don't know for whom of you it's more applicable. So someone is asking, are there any useful aggregators of think tank jobs, whether worldwide or particularly in Europe, and whether any of you have also experience to work in think tanks, or can say how what kind of particular aspects of work in think tank environment.
I have a very short thought on think tanks in Brussels or jobs in Brussels. There's a LinkedIn channel about jobs in Brussels. I think it's literally called Jobs in Brussels. If you follow it, they post jobs in Brussels very often. I have no knowledge of like an aggregator of all think tanks. Normally, if it's within a field, let's say, for example, I research China and I've spent a lot of time in China. They're quite easy to find out. At the beginning when I started getting into this, I just literally started looking them up one by one, and that's how I found them. There's not that many that work in a specific field. In China studies, there's maybe 15-ish think tanks in Europe that actually operate focusing on this, but I don't have any more specific thoughts on this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Another question: what are the chances for to find the position in industry for somebody who graduated from a philosophy faculty? And from the same person, the question whether it's possible to find such kind of job remotely without leaving their current country. So the person is currently, for example, in Bulgaria. Would it be possible to find a job in UK? What are the options for somebody with a philosophy degree in the industry? So I believe this is a question for Ivo.
Well, generally, the industry that I've worked mostly in is consultancy. If you're aiming at a top career in banking or consultancy, they have no problem with the type of degree that you have. The logic of top performing consultancy and banking firms is as follows. They want to hire somebody who is excellent, who's outstanding, whether they're an outstanding philosopher, an outstanding biologist, an outstanding linguist, whatever it is, an outstanding Olympic champion in a sport. They don't care. Why? Because if you're a high performer, you can perform well again in another field. That's the whole logic of like high performing consultancy industries. Although if the person's asking about remote jobs, I'm not sure that they were necessarily focusing on sort of high performance consultancy firms. I have seen some remote jobs but they're quite niche. It's normally been, for example, small firms that look for remote researchers. There's a company called I think Enodo Economics that researches China specifically, because I research China and I know the owner of the firm. She was looking for remote researchers recently. It's possible. It's quite niche. Normally, I would say try to follow if you're looking for remote work or something very flexible, follow niche companies within your field. There's a lot of these sort of small boutique firms that are flexible because they're small. At a large company, it's very hard for it to be flexible. The larger the company, the less flexible it becomes, because it becomes a huge bureaucracy. Again, in politics, there's a guy called Marco Papic, who is an advisor at a geopolitical advisory firm in California. They have a lot of flexible stuff there that I've seen. I mean, there's things that are kind of niche, but again, specifically to the person's field, it would be very hard to suggest anything specific.
Oops, sorry, I probably had internet connection. Sometimes it's out.
No worries. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I hope it was somewhat helpful.
Thank you. Someone asked Christian, can you please provide the list of resources that you mentioned? Because also people don't have very stable internet connection. It will be great to have like all the lists. But the same question probably applies to Ivo as well. You recommended some YouTube resources or books. If you send us the links, we will be happy to add to our YouTube video when we post this one, and people can directly access it. Thank you. This will be really great.
Perfect, no problem.
So there are also some questions about more like junior steps of the career. For example, PhD in the UK. What are 3 initial steps for Russians? Or also a related question, whether it's possible and how much it is common to do a PhD directly after bachelor without having a master degree. I know that in UK it's more common than in continental Europe. So maybe Christian can answer that a little bit.
Yes, I think it depends a little bit in terms of your academic disciplines. Some disciplines are a little bit more open to having a PhD done directly after the bachelor, especially those that are more competitive. They tend to nowadays want to have a master's degree, even though theoretically it's possible to do after your bachelor, but more and more it's getting more difficult to be accepted without a master's, because there's just so many people out there who have a master's that it becomes more complicated. In terms of what you need to do, I mean, the most important thing about doing a PhD is your PhD proposal. You need to have a good research proposal that really outlines a significant and original research topic. I think that's the most important thing that any supervisor will tell you, because those are the 2 criteria for PhD, originality and significance. So your PhD proposal needs to show both, and then you need to identify possible supervisors. Without having any idea who might be supervising your project, you're not necessarily going to go through the PhD application process successfully. There needs to be somebody who will want to supervise your project. So ideally, you want to look on the website of the universities that you might be interested in, who your possible supervisors could be. And then maybe write to them an email. Ask them, look, this is what I'm intending to do. Would you be interested in possibly supervising this? There's my CV, there's my research proposal, what you say? And then usually people will say, oh yeah, that sounds fantastic. This sounds very interesting, and I'd be happy. Or they say, look, this is not my research area. Maybe you find somebody else. So there's those 2 options. But usually when you've done your research and you've identified somebody who's possibly interested in that because they're doing something similar, then they'll probably say yes. Then finally, there's the aspect, obviously you need to have your English language tests. Those are usually very important. You need mainly IELTS. You need to have all your certificates, all your references for your application process. Once you're then admitted, then there's a question of funding. So obviously some universities will have their own funding. They will have scholarships that they advertise. Other universities won't have that. There's obviously national funding, the ESRC, for instance, for the social sciences, that provides some funding. But potentially there's also other kind of funders, maybe private donors who might be providing funding. But in the UK, it's quite common, if you can afford it, also to self-fund your PhD. So if you have the financial resources to be able to do that, then that is something quite common in the UK. That is not something unheard of, that people self-fund the tuition fees and the time in the university. And then you are able to accept any offer that you prefer, in a sense, because you can apply for a couple of universities. You don't just have to apply for one. You can apply 3, 4, 5 and see which one you prefer to go to in the end.
Thank you. Another question about someone would like to know how easy it is to find a postdoctoral position in UK currently, especially in the field of Iranian studies, Central Asian studies, and Russian studies. So whether this area of research is now very popular or not.
Okay, so if you apply for any of the fundings, they're always going to be competitive. So just to give you in probability terms, they're between 10 and 12% probability of being successful in an application. That's roughly the kind of probability. For an ERC, or European Research Council grant, the probability is more like 5%, maybe 6%. So that's roughly in probability terms what the likelihood is. Now, the downside to that is obviously more applications than not, you might not be successful, because that's just in probability terms how it goes. However, and that's the upside to that, in probability terms, when you apply for several of them, you add your probabilities, okay? So then you have your 12% and your 12% and your 12%, and eventually you might get to 40% probability of being successful. And by doing that, I think your chances will be so much higher if you apply for several of them at the same time. Well, not maybe exactly at the same time, but whenever the deadlines are, then you can apply for all of them and will increase your chances. Now, in terms of the Iranian/Russian studies, I mean, certainly if you're connected to general international relations debates, I think this could be something that is popular. You just need to connect it to something that is somewhat important and significant, that maybe has been discussed in the academic literature as something that is important and significant. And I think certainly with what's going on in the world in general, I think both of those things you can make a case for that being important. So I think you should be able to make a case for yourself.
Great, thank you. The one other question is more about later stages. So the question is, what are the chances to stay in academia after PhD? Where to find the postdoc position, how to apply successfully, and what, in your opinion, a crucial part of good academic CV to continue career in academia after postdoctoral stage?
Yes. So in terms of being successful and staying in academia, obviously, it's a long-term project, and that project involves obviously being first successful with a postdoctoral application. There's also, when you're there and you already have a visa and so on, there's also other things to stay in academia, like teaching fellowships and so on. So you can also then apply for those. But ultimately, what's important to then make the next step to get a permanent appointment and so on is obviously your publications, your research funding record, partially also your teaching, because especially with the teaching excellence framework, that's also become more and more important. What can you teach? How good is your teaching? A pedagogical approach, the subjects that you can teach, the more versatile, the better, obviously, but also needing to fit your profile according to what the universities need. But I think ultimately the currency is still your research record, making sure that you keep working on your publications, making sure that you have a very good funding record, making sure eventually, as you're a young academic that is starting off, that you're involved in PhD supervision and so on. All of those things matter. And once you have started developing this kind of profile, just keep continuing to grow in maturity, get your citation indices up, make sure that people are aware of you, of your existence, go to conferences, make sure that people value the kind of work that you do. And I think over time you will develop your network. There's no doubt you will develop your network that will help you grow as an academic, and that will also make sure that you are able to continue to stay in the profession for the long term.
We are already a little bit more than an hour, so maybe I just ask one or two more questions, because also I don't want to keep our guests for too long. And maybe then we can continue for people who would like to stay behind to answer additional questions where like are more general. So maybe this question can be, I would like to ask Kристиан and Ivo, because you have more experience from like looking from outside and directly, and especially for the UK. So one of our listeners is worried because he or she defended, got a master's degree in 2014, which is like almost 8 years, more than 8 years ago. And would it be problematic to start another PhD, to enroll into another PhD? So apparently there was also, so this person was doing a PhD studies for 3 years, but without actually graduating. So what is the, would do you think, is it problematic to have such a long gap, about 8-9 years after getting your master's degree, to start a new PhD studies, to enroll into university for PhD studies?
Look, it all depends a little bit why, because in all likelihood, when people admit you possibly to a PhD program, they might very well in the interview ask you what was the reason for not getting your PhD last time around. And I think there you need to have a convincing story as to why that didn't work out. There may be personal circumstances involved why it didn't work out. There may be a personal bereavement, negative circumstances, just be ready for that question, because people are likely to ask it, because they're not necessarily interested in why it didn't work out that time, but they're trying to assess whether there is a possibility that it could work out this time. And if you give them a good enough answer that explains, in a sense, that yes, there was this problem in the past, but now the circumstances have changed significantly, and there is a good chance that I would make it this time around, then I think you can persuade people that it might be worthwhile giving you a chance to try again. So it's possible, but you need to be ready to give an answer. Don't hide that fact. Don't try to kind of pretend it's not there, because people are probably going to ask you, and the less you say about it, the more they're going to be interested in it. So be forthcoming, and I think that will increase your chances.
And probably the last question for today, what will be your best advice about how to find PhD supervisor and how to communicate with him or her?
I think in terms of finding one, try and look who shares your research interest. Who shares your research interest? Try and look for an accomplished scholar who maybe also has a record for mentoring people. I think some people might be excellent researchers, but they're not necessarily got the skills to mentor people very much, in which case perhaps you might want to find somebody where you can see that they've done that in the past and they're willing to do that and they're willing to mentor you. Have a little look around in the profession. If you're attending conferences, people talk about people. So go to conferences, talk to people, ask about people. If there's somebody that you're interested in, why don't you go up to that person and have a little chat? And, it doesn't have to be like, oh, would you supervise me immediately? But just have a little chat and see what impression you get. Is that a nice person? Is that somebody that you would like to work with? And if you get the impression that they would be a nice person, then why don't you ask them and say, look, this is what I would like to do. Would you possibly be interested? And then I think if you've chosen the right person, they're probably likely to say yes. And I'd be delighted to work with you, and send me your proposal. And I think from there you can start a conversation. You're always welcome. Obviously, it might not be open to you to visit a conference, in which case, I guess, send them emails, because what else can you do? But just kind of give a little background about yourself. Who are you? Why are you contacting them? How did you come up with the idea of contacting them specifically? So what's kind of interesting about their profile to you and your project that you're intending to do? And I think then people are also more likely to answer. What's probably not so likely to happen is when you're just cold calling / emailing people that have no relation to what you're trying to do and have no clear track record or interest in what you're, then it's probably not so likely to be successful. But if you've really researched them a little bit and you see that's the sort of stuff that they're interested in and you're also interested in that, I think the chances are much, much higher.
Thanks to everyone. I think with that, we probably need to stop here. Especially great thanks to Ivo and to Christian, and please send us the resources that you mentioned during your presentations. We will be happy to add them to the video and to the posts about this particular meeting. And of course, if also you are happy for people to contact you directly and ask questions, I can expect that probably you will get many questions after this meeting. I hope it's not going to be scary for you. Please then let us know, and provide some email address or whatever else other ways you prefer people to contact you. Thank you so much for joining this meeting, and I hope it was very helpful for everyone today. And thank you for your time, both Ivo and Christian. Please stay behind. Whoever wants to know some more general questions, we got many more questions which are not particularly related to the topics that our speakers covered today, and not specifically related to United Kingdom. And maybe I can just answer them from like my experience and other people, and we can switch to Russian, so it's easier for everyone who joined.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much.
Likewise. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And feel free to go, for everybody, feel free to contact me. And I think Christian is happy as well to get contacted. So yeah, feel free to drop us an email.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Окей. So, в общем, давайте тогда, да, можно теперь переключиться на русский язык. Мы получили довольно много вопросов, которые непосредственно не были связаны с заявленной темой, видимо, по той причине, что эта информация об этом мероприятии распространялась в разных чатах. И тут она была и в чате абитуриентов, и в чате ученых, и шла через другие каналы. Прежде всего, я хотел бы посоветовать тем, кто подключился сегодня, посмотреть также предыдущие встречи по поиску академических позиций. Многие из этих вопросов там уже поднимались. И я просто, то есть мы вместе отобрали с Екатериной порядка там 7 вопросов или сколько-то около того, на которые мы, наверное, могли бы ответить сегодня, не затягивая встречу надолго. Екатерина, вы сочетаете или мне надо где-то их надо искать? Что вы предпочитаете?
Так, да. Если я найду вперед, то я зачитаю.
Ну, давайте тогда. Я, скорее всего, их найду. Я могу просто, наверное...
Нет, подождите. А где находятся те вопросы, которые... Все. Да, давайте, нашла. Стоит ли подавать на PhD, если уже есть российская степень кандидата наук?
Это неоднократно уже обсуждалось. В большинстве случаев нет. То есть вы можете это сделать, но в большинстве случаев вам придется объяснять комиссии, почему вы хотите получить еще одну ученую степень, хотя она у вас уже имеется. В отдельных ситуациях это возможно, и, по крайней мере, скажем, особенно в гуманитарных направлениях, порою это удается объяснить тем, что вы хотите слегка сменить специализацию, поэтому вы хотите пройти аспирантуру по смежной тематике. Это гораздо сложнее для представителей STEM-дисциплин, биологии, химии, физики, потому что в большинстве случаев люди просто не видят смысла. У вас уже есть ученая степень, и вам не нужно повторно проходить аспирантуру.
Можно ли найти академическую работу через визу Blue Card?
Blue Card очень распространенная, особенно если вы хотите переехать в Германию, хотя она выдается в других странах, вариант для переезда в Европу, особенно если у вас есть либо университетское образование, университетский диплом, либо, что еще лучше, кандидатский диплом. Но Blue Card можно получить только тогда, когда у вас уже есть приглашение на работу. Вот если вы нашли компанию, в которой вы можете работать, университет, в которой вы нашли постдокторскую позицию, то, имея на руках приглашение, вы можете подавать на Blue Card. Это действительно рекомендуется делать, потому что Blue Card позволяет получить постоянное разрешение на проживание через 2-3 года, в зависимости от знания или незнания языка. Blue Card дает разрешение на работу не только вам, но и вашему супругу, супруге. И недавно, по крайней мере, вот в Германии, я не знаю насчет других стран, они сильно упростили процедуру получения голубой карты, потому что теперь для этого, если раньше нужно было работать по вашей тематике, то есть если у вас диплом химика, вы должны работать как химик. Теперь этого не требуется. Да неважно, какой у вас университетский диплом, если у вас есть на руках приглашение на работу, то вы можете претендовать на получение голубой карты. Они также снизили минимальный уровень оплаты месячной, который раньше требовался для получения голубой карты. Он вообще был гораздо ниже для представителей научных профессий, для инженеров, для специалистов IT, но сейчас его снизили еще меньше. То есть, скажем, раньше аспиранты практически никогда не имели шансов получить голубую карту, это начиналось где-то с постдоковского уровня или индустрии. Теперь, может быть, есть больше шансов у аспирантов, потому что это граница снижена. Но вам нужно приглашение на работу, вы не можете иначе получить голубую карту.
Есть смутное представление, что в ряде случаев исследователь, получая позицию в сети типа Макс Планк, при этом прикрепляется и к университету без отдельной процедуры поступления. Верно ли это представление и как выглядит механизм такого прикрепления?
Прошу прощения, у меня тут, видимо, проблемы со связью периодически возникают.
Еще раз?
Нет, я понял вопрос, да. Это по поводу исследователя в институтах типа Макс Планк, правильно? Я не совсем понимаю, о чем именно идет речь. То есть, что имеется в виду в данном случае под исследователем. Если речь идет об аспирантуре, то это как раз совершенно стандартная процедура. Если вы получаете позицию в аспирантуре в институте типа Макс Планк или другом научном институте в Германии, то вы автоматически прикрепляетесь к университету для получения степени PhD. Потому что институт типа Макс Планк, я вот работаю в таком же институте, Макс-Дельбрук-центре, не имеет права фактически выдавать степени. Это может сделать только университет. Поэтому, если вы говорите об аспирантуре, то это совершенно нормальный процесс. Для этого особо ничего вам делать не требуется. Это автоматически происходит в тот момент, когда вы начинаете свою аспирантуру. Если речь идет о постдоковской позиции, то тут я уже не понимаю. То есть как бы смысла в этом, если вы уже постдок, то вам нет нужды прикрепляться к университете. Это, для аспирантуры это нормальная процедура.
Спасибо. Можно ли поступать в 40 лет в магистратуру? Занимаясь африканским искусством в России, занимаюсь, но не понимаю, есть ли ограничения по возрасту.
Для вас для магистратуры в целом, для вас хорошая новость. Для магистратуры нет вообще-то ограничений по возрасту, как правило. Для аспирантуры дело другое. Потому что формально бывает очень сложно найти позицию в аспирантуре, если вы защитились, вот о чем говорил Кристиан, если у вас магистерский диплом был получен лет 10 тому назад. Почти наверняка найдется гораздо больше претендентов на ту же самую позицию, которые защитились недавно, и в большинстве случаев им будет отдано предпочтение. Но для поступления в магистратуру формально никаких возрастных ограничений нет.
Адаптировать ли резюме под каждую позицию или найти работу после PhD не в научном профиле?
Ну, я советую вам посмотреть тому человеку, который задал этот вопрос, предыдущие встречи. Там Марианна подробно отвечала как раз на этот вопрос. Кратко рекомендуется сделать следующее. Рекомендуется сделать одно огромное CV, в которое вы соберете абсолютно все свои достижения. Все конференции, на которые вы ездили, все статьи, которые вы публиковали, все методы, которые вы освоили, soft skills, hard skills, все, что вообще в голову может придет, запишите туда. Но потом из этого огромного CV на каждую позицию выбираете только то, что конкретно этой позиции соответствует. Вам нужно убедить человека, который потенциально дает вам работу, что именно вы лучший кандидат, что именно вы соответствуете тем требованиям, которые описаны в этой позиции. И для этого из огромного CV вы делаете выжимку. И для каждой позиции эта выжимка будет своей. Это наиболее эффективный результат, алгоритм, вернее, поиска.
Ну и вторая часть вопроса, этого же вопроса, как найти работу после PhD не в научном профиле. Ну вот Кристиан как раз, извините, Айво как раз про это рассказывал.
Да, это примерно то, что Айво, в общем, и описывал. Очень многие люди у нас из лаборатории, несколько аспирантов, они ушли в компании. Есть люди, которые сразу приходят в аспирантуру с идеей о том, что они хотят работать в индустрии. Есть люди, которые просто в ходе аспирантуры, они еще не знают, чем они хотели бы заниматься. Они решают к концу аспирантуры, что они скорее уйдут в компанию. Но тут зависит от, конечно, тоже в том числе ваших навыков, которые вы получили в ходе аспирантуры. Наверное, вот можно Айво писать с дополнительными деталями. Если у вас в аспирантуре у вас есть 2-3 года, ну, в большинстве случаев 4, пока вы защититесь. Последние 2 года уже можно и полезно начинать думать о том, чем вы хотите заниматься, и искать возможные варианты. Как правило, крупные институты, университеты проводят в том числе и встречи как бы хедхантеров, где будущие кандидаты наук, будущие PhD, могут уже познакомиться с компаниями, с представителями компаний, куда они могут перейти после защиты.
Где можно работать в науке с небольшим или нулевым количеством преподавания? Как привлекать финансирование в университет, но не становиться рабом компаний, заставляющих заниматься чем-то неинтересным? Что нельзя опубликовать? Как найти, сформулировать свой оригинальный исследовательский проект?
Наверное, последний вопрос я не берусь ответить. Это зависит от того, чем вы занимаетесь. Но по поводу преподавания сильно зависит от того, в какой области вы работаете. Прежде всего, если вы и где именно. То есть если вы работаете в научном институте, вот, скажем, тот же Макс Планк или как у нас МДС, у вас, в общем-то, будет нулевое преподавание, потому что вы занимаетесь исключительно наукой. У вас нет обязанности читать и вести лекции. Вот. В университетах это, конечно, зависит от того, в каком именно вы университете и какого типа позицию вы получили. То есть это достаточно общий вопрос, который зависит от конкретных условий и, главное, от вашей сферы деятельности. Я, конечно, подозреваю, что в гуманитарных дисциплинах преподавание всегда будет больше и довольно.
Ну, я могу ответить про гуманитарные дисциплины. Не понимаю, кто, Александр или я выпала?
Александр.
Александр. Хорошо. Значит, ну, насчет гуманитарных дисциплин, конечно, здесь преподавание важно, потому что гуманитарные дисциплины – это работа все-таки с людьми, и опыт работы с людьми, он важен. Я просто как представитель гуманитарных дисциплин, а Александр представитель STEM, как раз вот он работает исключительно в научной области. И насчет, как найти, сформулировать свой оригинальный исследовательский проект, есть общие принципы. То есть название проекта – это всегда сжатая область научных интересов. То есть, ну, есть просто такая практика, вы берете и описываете то, что хотите исследовать, намного описываете, потом сокращаете, выбираете из того, что написали задачи, потом сжимаете до цели и уже из цели выводите тему. Ну, как обратный процесс тому, что мы делали в университетах, когда писали ВКР, да? То есть тут обратный процесс. Вот таким образом можно сформулировать тему. Но, конечно, это невозможно сделать, если у вас нет начитки научной литературы из той области, в которой вы собираетесь делать новые открытия. Александр, вы вернулись?
Да, прошу прощения. Сегодня почему-то с интернетом большие проблемы. Все время рвется.
Ну, в общем, я ответила за гуманитариев на тот же самый вопрос, на который отвечали вы. Я читаю следующий. Как может пригодиться российский диплом аспиранта за рубежом?
Боюсь, что никак. Даже на территории России, то есть если имеется в виду диплом об окончании аспирантуры, то, в общем, даже на территории России не совсем понятно, для чего эта бумажка нужна и в каких случаях она может пригодиться. Она не является, собственно, защитой диплома, она не удостоверяет получение научной степени, и она не имеет никакого значения нигде. Это
Ну,
очень важный вопрос.
Да, так как я приехала недавно из России, то могу сказать, что вот эта бумажка, она действительно никому не нужна, и аспирантура как одна из ступеней образовательных, она была признана, ну, в общем, признана, а потом снова не признана, и получается, что там всего лишь 5 лет было, когда эти бумажки выдавали, всего на протяжении 5 лет. В России их применяют как свидетельство о повышении квалификации, а за рубежом, ну, они никак не рассматриваются. Ну, так же, как и в России, если вы захотите где-то в совете защищаться, у вас спросят статьи, у вас спросят, ну, все, что нужно для защиты, а диплом аспиранта, ну, вот не спросят. Ну, за рубежом тем более нет такого документа. Из-за войны и личных рисков человек уехал из России и по окончанию аспирантуры написал больше, чем половину своей диссертации. Но так как ее не закончил и не защитился, то вот теперь вопрос. То есть удаленно в России защититься, конечно же, не получится. И есть ли возможность продолжить исследовательскую работу, неважно, по той же или по другой теме, за рубежом? Неплохой английский и активно учит немецкий язык. Коллега,
Разумеется, да. То есть я так понимаю, что у вас есть диплом магистра, ну или диплом специалитета, как в большинстве случаев специалитет приравнивается к магистратуре. Это означает, что вы можете поступить в аспирантуру в Германии. Я просто советовал бы вам рассылать электронные письма профессорам, которые работают по вашей тематике. То, что у вас уже есть опыт и наработки в этой области, будет несомненным плюсом. Поэтому да, просто пишите письма профессорам, подавайтесь в аспирантуру и пытайтесь найти себе место. Это абсолютно, конечно, это возможно.
Да, на встрече, которая...
Есть еще вопрос в чате, который, видимо, я не знаю точно, пришел ли, да, он пришел совсем недавно. По поводу, то, что человек уехал тоже из-за войны из России и хотел бы преподавать в университете. Но я не совсем понимаю, как становится преподавателем в университете в Европе. Я советую вам посмотреть, зайти на наш канал в YouTube, канал академических мостов, и посмотреть там видеозапись предыдущей встречи, где давались советы по поводу поиска академических позиций. И именно такой вопрос задавался, и Марианна давала достаточно подробный ответ на него.
Здесь есть как раз вопрос, как найти, где найти эти встречи. Я сейчас в группу, не в группу, в чат всем брошу ссылки. И тут еще вопросы, да, которые пришли на Ной Адамова. Где, так, скажите, где можно найти видеозаписи? Насколько важна оценка за магистерскую диссертацию для PhD?
Хороший вопрос. Я, честно говоря, не знаю ответа. Наверное, это зависит от правил конкретного университета. То есть оценки ваши могут иметь... Конкретно оценка за магистерскую, я не знаю, имеет ли какое-то значение. Оценки вообще, то есть диплом сданный, они могут, безусловно, учитываться. Скажем, в Германии они, безусловно, учитываются. Нужен минимальный определенный балл.
Да, нужен определенный балл. Вообще, чем выше балл, тем больше шансов. То есть не везде есть такое требование. Часто больше смотрят на специфику вашей работы, да, и на proposal, да, если там требуется писать на мотивационные письма, смотрят больше, но оценки в ряде случаев тоже учитываются. И чем выше оценка, тем, конечно же, больше шансов. Но если оценка невысокая, ну, средний балл за диплом невысокая, то тоже отчаиваться не стоит, потому что мотивационное письмо и сопутствующие документы имеют все-таки приоритетное значение. Правильно, Александр?
Да, меня опять отрезал, правильно?
Да, правильно, я подхватила на половине фразы.
Спасибо.
Так, российская ученая степень кандидата наук признается в других странах?
Да. Это первый вопрос. Мы на него уже отвечали. Совсем непонятно, почему этот вопрос снова и снова возникает. Ученая степень есть ученая степень. Это не важно, как она называется. Она может называться PhD по-английски. Она называется доктор биологических, социологических, филологических наук в России. Она называется доктор РНАТ в Германии. Это не имеет никакого значения, как именно она называется. Конечно, если вы защитились там в Стэнфорде или Кембридже, это будет иметь больше вес, чем если вы защитились в небольшом университете там где-нибудь в Финляндии или Норвегии, и то же самое справедливо для других случаев. То есть вес университета имеет значение. Внутри России, если вы защитились в МГУ, в СПбГУ, или вы защитились в небольшом университете, люди будут лучше или хуже знать о том, где вы получили свою степень. Но степень остается степенью. Она все равно признается на законном уровне.
Александр, звук. Со звуком что-то плохо.
Сейчас лучше?
Да.
Что особенно это касается STEM, то есть если вы получили диплом в биологии, в химии, в физике, скорее всего, у вас проблем не возникнет вообще никаких. В гуманитарных дисциплинах могут быть сложности, в зависимости от того, чем именно вы занимаетесь. И, конечно, когда речь заходит о медицинских науках или юриспруденции, вот там практически наверняка нужно будет проходить дополнительное подтверждение вашей степени. В STEM это практически никогда не требуется, в гуманитарных в большинстве случаев ваша степень будет признаваться.
Ну, вопросов больше нет. Александр, можно я выдам свой статус? В общем, мы еще являемся модераторами Ковчега, да, Александр модератор Ковчег ученые, я модератор Ковчег абитуриенты. И в этих группах Ковчега очень тоже много информации, люди друг у друга спрашивают, друг другу рекомендуют. И в закрепленных ссылках ученых Ковчега также есть много полезной информации. Александр, какой? Вы, наверное, больше про это расскажете.
Ну да, там, естественно, в основном в закрепах вы найдете информацию о том, о разных научных позициях, что вы можете сделать с каждой из них, где искать работу. Там есть ссылки на финансовые фонды, кроме Мари Кюри, существует, естественно, HFSP, существует ФЭПС, существует ЭМБА. В зависимости от того, какой области вы занимаетесь, вы можете... То есть Мари Кюри, на самом деле, естественно, не ограничивается, она просто более широкая, охватывает более широкий спектр наук. И заходите, присоединяйтесь, задавайте вопросы, много информации вы найдете в закрепах, то, что не найдете, вы всегда можете спросить и получить там ответ. И мы проводим вот такие встречи достаточно регулярно, в том числе собирая вопросы из чатов Ковчега. Это одна из сторон деятельности нашей команды, как команда академических мостов, которая пытается налаживать мосты между академией, которая осталась в России, которая была вынуждена уехать из-за войны.
Собственно, да, все ресурсы вы там найдете и можете спросить еще то, что не спросили сегодня, и выяснить ответы на те вопросы, которые у вас еще возникнут в будущем. Спасибо большое всем.